participación de todos aquí presentes. Voy a dejar una pequeña introducción con Rosana Hoffman, oficial a cargo del programa del proyecto Derecho Espacial para Nuevos Actores de Naciones Unidas, quien nos dará unas breves palabras. Rosana, adelante.
Thank you so much, Magdalena, and thank you so much to all of the participants being here in the room. I will be presenting to you also a bit later in the afternoon, and then I will make a bit more of an introduction on what it is I actually do at the UN. But I would like to take this opportunity here now to thank, of course, the Air Force, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and all the other high-level speakers of this morning for their very, very important words that they shared, and of course, especially to you in the room for being here. We will be working together the next 3 days intensely on space law and space policy matters. And a little bit later as well, I will be explaining in detail, especially what the project work will be about. In preparation of that, however, I would just like you to know that the reason we decided together, of course, with the Air Force and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on this program, on the content of the program, and on the scenario-based exercise, this case that you received and you have printed out, is that this is a combination of knowledge gain and sharing knowledge with you, and at the same time for you to implement that knowledge that you receive here in the next 3 days by solving 3, let's call them fake cases in outer space, but not so fake in the end, quite realistic of what can actually happen when delving into these very important activities that we do in outer space. So beginning on the fundamentals of international space law we will hear today, continuing on to the importance of a national space law, continuing on to policy aspects, looking into aspects of dark and quiet skies, planetary protection, planetary defense, just to name a few of the areas that we will be delving into. So I do not want to take up much of your time now. You will hear of me enough in the afternoon. I thank you again truly for being here, and I really want to also thank the co-organizers of this Space Law Technical Advisory Mission, and I wish you a lot of fun, but of course also a lot of knowledge intake and knowledge sharing in these 3 days. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Rosana. A continuación voy a presentar a nuestra siguiente moderadora, Yukiko Okumura, quien trabaja en la Oficina de Asuntos del Espacio Extraterrestre de las Naciones Unidas en la sección de Asuntos Jurídicos, Políticos y del Comité. Desempeña las funciones de Secretaría del Grupo de Trabajo sobre la situación y aplicación de los 5 tratados de Naciones Unidas sobre el espacio extraterrestre de la Subcomisión de Asuntos Jurídicos. Adquirió su experiencia en Derecho y Políticas Espaciales gracias a su formación de máster de Derecho de la Universidad de Viena, en Austria, y máster y doctorado centrados en Derecho Espacial por la Universidad de Keio, en Japón. Antes de incorporarse a las Naciones Unidas, la señora Okumura trabajó como investigadora postdoctoral en la Universidad de Keio, especializándose en el campo del Derecho Espacial, y trabajó en la Oficina Jurídica y de Cumplimiento de la Agencia de Exploración Aeroespacial de Japón, JAXA, donde se ocupó del derecho espacial internacional, así como de otros asuntos jurídicos. También ha trabajado en el Centro de Apoyo Integrado para la No Proliferación Nuclear y la Seguridad Nuclear del Organismo de Energía Atómica de Japón, donde adquirió experiencia en el diseño e impartición de programas de capacitación y cursos de formación. Yukiko también ha sido profesora de Derecho Espacial, Derecho Internacional en la Academia Nacional de Defensa de Japón y otras universidades. Yukiko, adelante.
Gracias, Magdalena, para la introducción. Muy buenas tardes o buenos días. Me llamo Yukiko Okumura y hoy voy a presentar en el tema de gobernanza global de las actividades espaciales y el papel de la COPUOS. So I will switch to English so that nobody will think I am an expert in Spanish. I will have to speak in Please presentation. Thank you. So, okay, thank you very much. Perfect. So, today, because it's the first presentation of UNOOSA, I would like to briefly explain on the importance of space in general and what UNOOSA is doing and how it would be important for Chile to take a lead in this area. So, space is growing rapidly. As you have heard General Saez discuss on this importance of space, it is rapidly growing, and we already have more than 80 countries doing space program all over the world. And because of that, I mean, it's hopefully okay, that's much easier. So we have around 16 active satellites in outer space. New technology is developing and there's more than 100 states is still not launching satellites yet, meaning there is emergence of expanding this area still. And why is it expanding at this so much? We can see because we learned the benefit of space technology more than ever during this pandemic period. If we had no satellites, we wouldn't be able to telework from home. We wouldn't be able to track Uber drivers delivering our meals and checking where they are lost in the traffic. These things has been very useful. We learned a lesson. It's not only that, we have telemedicine who helps people far away to have hospital services, medical services by satellite. It's not only us working in the space sector, but public in general realize the importance of space. So that is why space is a highlight now. And industry has realized its economy impact. So in terms of economy, it's 450 billion is valued right now, and projection in 2040, it's over 1 to 2.7 billions or trillions even, that is projected. So this is important. I don't know if you see the small letters here, but I'm sure my colleagues will be sharing the presentation later, so you can read it later on. I'm just grasping the key points here. But because this space economy is growing, what we're now doing is importance is legal and policy. Because in terms of, scientists develop technology. How do you authorize? How do you supervise their work? Economy, they want to expand. What is the clear guidance of the government to provide the industry? How to govern them? How should they approach the government? These things really needs to be clear. And that is why legal and policy is important. And I understand your government has successfully had this Council of Space Policy, who is now drafting the space policy to see ahead how to grow, which is an excellent part. And soon, I'm sure you would also be looking into some regulatory factors as well. So in that sense, Chile is in the run. And we're happy to be working with you in this throughout this journey. So let me turn to the next slide. Oh, it's this side. Sorry. So what does UN do? First, I want to share an example that we provide an intergovernmental body to discuss on these topics in a governmental level. So we have this Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and in that committee, we have been making 5 treaties and 5 principles, also guidelines on how to mitigate space debris, how to use outer space in a long-term sustainability. And this committee actually was set up in 1958 as ad hoc. It's been there quite a long time. Can someone tell me why it triggered the committee establishment in 1958? Does anybody know what happened in 1957? Perfect, thank you, Professor. So Sputnik happened. And UN is thought to be very slow in making decisions, but right after Sputnik, we managed to agree on setting up a committee, ad hoc committee in 1958. And it was only 18 member states at that point, which rapidly grew. And 2022, we were still waiting for 2023 decisions. So I'm gonna share 2022. We currently have 102 member states that come together and discuss what's best for space. Now, I highlighted 1973, it's 37 member states. Has anyone heard the director speak on 1973 this morning? Do you know why I highlighted 1973? Yes. Exactly. I highlighted because Chile became a member state already in the 1970s. So your government has been discussing the space matters over 50 years, and this is one amazing achievement. And we thank you all for your support in being active in this discussion. So in this committee, what we do is to talk about legal framework and trends of what to do. But I want to highlight you one thing. This committee is based on consensus decision-making. Consensus decision-making is not a voting system, but a decision-making where all member states have to agree, or let's say, not a single member state cannot disagree. If there is one country that disagrees, there is no decision. And lots of academics, people say that this is slow and it makes the process go later and takes time. But remember, we are here, UN is here to have a sustainable outer space. And we want all member states to comply on the existing rules. So what happens is that if there's a voting system and it's only the majority that agrees, what will happen to the rest? Can they just ignore the rules? No, we need all member states to agree. That is why we have decided to go with a consensus decision-making system, and this is the beauty of our committee. So this is what I want to highlight as one of the Secretariat team, that consensus is not all bad. It is there that we find a middle ground that everybody agrees and everybody can comply with to maintain a sustainable outer space. So what do we discuss in COPUOS? We discussed on very trendy topics, space debris mitigation. We even started talking about remediation, meaning taking out space debris, long-term sustainability, nuclear power sources application. This I am going to discuss in details tomorrow. Space traffic management as well, I'm going to discuss tomorrow, so I'm just going to skip through it. Space resources, how to go to moon, take out the resources and bring it back. This is currently under discussion. And national space legislation, this is what we're doing more or less today. And we have Hernan come to our legal subcommittee and talk about this project, how Chile is doing in space law and space policy. This is also something active presented by Chile, but I want to highlight dark and quiet skies because this is one of the important topics to your country. Astronomy is important in your country, I understand. And dark and quiet skies is a topic where we discuss the balance between outer space activities and astronomy. So in that sense, this is a very important topic to all of us in the committee right now. Near-Earth objects. I'm sure most of you have saw Armageddon, the Hollywood movie. It's about that. When you find an asteroid coming to hit Earth, what do? It's what we discuss, and we don't want to be like extinct like dinosaurs, so we discuss really seriously. Global health is what we discussed in earlier, telemedicine. Or, for example, with the Earth observation data, you can also identify where is marijuana spreading, malaria. Very different. This you can also identify by Earth observation, and these cool topics we discuss in Vienna every year, and we have a cycle. First, in January, we have 10 days of scientific and technical subcommittee. March, we have the legal subcommittee. And then to wrap up, we have in June a COPUOS meeting, a committee on the peaceful uses of outer space. And this we reported to New York, to General Assembly, and we got approval, and we do another cycle next year. So it keeps on forever. And it started, the important part, we started in 1958. And it will continue because we see lots of difficult challenges coming ahead. So I said 102 member states. I just want to briefly let you know the balance of the regions that we have in the as 102 member states. From the top, we have Africa, Eastern Europe, Latin America. Out of 33 Latin American countries, I think we have around 17 Latin American countries as member states. And then we have the Asian group and the Western European group. Now, this is actually a well-balanced committee. We reflect all the region's voices. And I want to highlight, in here, you might find some countries that don't do space at all. Why? Because we do consensus-based decision-making. We can reflect the voices of those who are not yet on board with space program. So again, this is one of the beauty of consensus decision-making. So now I talked enough about COPUOS meetings. What do we do other than COPUOS meetings? We are not only a convener of the multi-governmental discussion platforms, but we do also capacity building, and we also are a gateway, meaning we provide opportunities to member states or students, academias. These are also our mandates. So just to give you a quick glance of what we do, we not only do spatial, we do, like, for example, let's see what is interesting. For example, General Syed said, human resources, education is important. I think he mentioned that Chile has delivered to 25 schools in 7 regions. That's amazing. And that is what we also try to enhance from our Space for Youth program, where we try to reach out to the youth to educate and have them get interested more in this space arena. Also, Space for Women is something I want to mention. I'm so happy that today we have lots of female participants, but I think there's still margins to grow female proportion. So I think we have to encourage as a UN, because science and technology, engineering, math, education, STEM education, we have seen some research that until year of 7, girls are good at math. They love math. But then suddenly, around 12 years old, they start to get less interest in this STEM area. it's sad, but we have to encourage these their interests and have these female work more in this area. To be honest, I'm a lawyer. I'm not good at math, so I cannot talk more about it. But I also want to highlight that we have UN Spider program, which is a disaster management, how to deal with things when there's a disaster, how to use space technology. General Saez also mentioned space economy. We have a program on space economy. What does your country do? What can we do to help? What can other member states that has now good space economy growth, what do they do? These examples could be shared from this program also. And we have something like Space for Water, where we identify water resources using Earth observation data and things. Now, I want to talk about access to space for all, because we provide a gateway. Sorry, went too fast a bit, but we are, as I said, we provide opportunities, and through this space, access to space for all is a good example, because when students build up CubeSats, they have to launch. But launching CubeSat isn't easy. Building is quite, let's say, more familiar, because cost-wisely, the parts and the knowledge can be done in a classroom. But when it's deployment of this CubeSat, it's quite difficult. So we have partnered up, for example, with Japanese Space Agency to have this CubeSat launched to International Space Station and from there deployed. So these things we also provide, and that is why we also identify ourselves as a gateway to member states. Now, space law, it's not only these technical advisory missions that we do from Rosanna's project, we do a little bit more in general. We have a curriculum of space law, which is let's say a curriculum discussed by well-known space lawyers, professors, and designed for engineers. This is not a curriculum for space lawyers. Space lawyers can stick their nose into the books and just study. But we need engineers to understand what is the basic rules in outer space. And this curriculum provides what could be the basic of teaching to engineers what to understand. Second point, we have a United Nations Conference on Space Law and Policy. This year, we will have it from 28 to 30 November. It's coming up soon. However, we still don't have it on our webpage online, but I'm sure if it's the information will come, I'm sure we could share the link to you in the coming days. If not, please reach out to us. It will be 100% online, so please feel free to register and listen to these cool topics. But this is a conference for, let's say, for everyone, open to young students, for industry people, NGOs. It's a well widespread, let's say, a little bit academic topic, and we will go by article on Outer Space Treaty and have presentation made by lawyers and policymakers. So this might be something entertaining for you. Now, what is different for this space law for new space actors, this today's technical advisory mission, is that this is a project tailor-made to your needs, to the government of Chile. Chile has been good partners from 2019, and as mentioned earlier, this is our third time to do this technical advisory mission, and this year we're focusing on the policy side. This program is very unique for Chile, and it has been discussed between Hernan, Magdalena, and UNOOSA for in all aspects, so that you today can learn from new ideas and practices from governments, what they do, and absorb and digest this information and think about what could be put into the new space policy or the space law coming up in the future for Chile. So this is unique, and I have to say one of the unique topics we are discussing today, maybe not today, but throughout this technical advisory mission is again the dark and quiet skies topic. There will be a presenter from ESO, where he would be presenting on the importance of astronomy and how to best protect activities of astronomy. So this is unique for Chile programming. And I'm sure Rosanna has much to say about the uniqueness of the programs. I leave it up to her on the details later on. But last but not least, I want to quickly wrap up because we're a little bit pushing in terms of the timelines. But I want to say that outer space it's huge, but still it's a one area. So we have to protect it, and we have to use it as sustainable as much as possible. So what UN is doing, yes, I have mentioned that it's difficult for me to look at the slides here, but COPUOS, we do discuss in the committee governmental level, and then we do multilateral sharing of space situation domain awareness information through, let's say, capacity buildings and such. We also are maintaining registration of space objects, which I am going to also speak tomorrow. You'll see me a lot tomorrow also. And we have all these international mechanism for notification of what other member states do, so that you understand, and you will know the information as soon as possible. But as having said all, what I want to highlight when it comes to the trendiest topic that I want to discuss is the space traffic management. Can you see the image? This is not a picture, this is an image, but it shows that it's crowded, and you can't put traffic lights, or you can't put police to, control the traffic out there. So we need to have some type of space traffic management, and this is important. That is why the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, has decided in 2021 in the 75th General Assembly that we will focus in the coming 25 years on number of topics. And he called it as the common agenda. And he picked 12 important topics, including like climate change and I'm not going to go into details, but space is one of the 12. And he has pointed out 3 points. Multi-stakeholder dialogue on outer space as part of Summit of the Future is important. We will be having a Summit of Future in 2024 and discuss all these matters. He also mentioned seek high-level political agreement on the peaceful, secure, and sustainable use of outer space, and then move towards a global regime to coordinate space traffic. So these are the things he thinks we would like member states to get together and discuss and agree on how to approach. And in the Summit of the Future in 2024, we will have a high-level track, and one of it is space. So this is how much space is the highlight these days, and for as UN also to support member states discuss. So today, all of you here are the leaders in the space arena in discussing these topics. What I can add to it as the last slides to go, Secretary General has recently drafted a policy brief which talks about how to deal with issues, and he has identified again that in space, what is important, there's 4 issues. uncoordinated space traffic must be solved. Accumulating space debris is something we also need to discuss. And then question arising from possible resource exploitation, mainly concerning the moon and beyond. And then last but not least, potential military confrontation. Now, when it comes to arms race or let's say disarmament, it's not our office's mandate. We only deal with peaceful uses of outer space. So when it comes to military or disarmament, military peaceful use, this is under our office. But when it comes to weapons, it's a different office. So I can't really talk on behalf of them. But what we can just quickly mention is this is also a very difficult topic because we have not yet decided what is a space weapon. There's no definition of space weapon. That is why it's very hard for member states to agree. But these are the 4 issues that we have to approach as a general space topic in the coming years to solve the issue. So it's also very small letters. You might not be able to see it. So there is also recommendation, space sustainability, space security, inclusive approaches to governance. There are all sorts of recommendations mentioned and what to discuss for the future. But I leave it up to you, to those who are very interested in this topic, to read it afterwards. So this is the end of my presentation, and thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Yukiko, por tu presentación. Sin duda, hay mucho trabajo que hacer a nivel multilateral, tanto en los temas científicos espaciales como los de seguridad. Y agradecemos también el hecho de que hayas abordado todas las temáticas que se ven desde COPUOS, incluyendo, por supuesto, el tráfico espacial, que trae bastantes consecuencias, incluyendo la protección, o lo que queremos luchar nosotros como desde Chile, que es la protección de cielos oscuros y quietos para la observación. Incluye también la defensa de nuestro país en caso de que un objeto se aproxime. Y Chile ha tomado bastante liderazgo en este tema, considerando, como ya se dijo anteriormente, que tenemos casi el 70% de la observación a nivel mundial del espacio ultraterrestre y el espacio profundo. Dada la presentación de Yukiko, ahora dejamos abierto el espacio para que se generen preguntas, todo lo que puedan y quieran generar. Veo una pregunta por allá.
Sorry, I returned too early. English is better.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very nice and clear. But there's one thing concerning the weapons. So you said there's another commission for the weapons?
Yes, there's a disarmament commission on this disarmament in Geneva.
Okay, it's not a COPUOS commission, but it's the General Commission for the UN?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's dealing with disarmament on missiles, nuclear weapons, everything, and space weapon is part of them. There was a commission set up called ad hoc committee called PAROS, Preventions of Arms Race of Outer Space. This has been set up in, let's say, around the 70s, but has stopped discussion in early 90s because there was no consensus to reconvene the ad hoc committee. So in that sense, there is, for the time being, no powers convened. But in general, they're all talking about disarmament and arms race. Also, there are this recent efforts by member states on open-ended working group, how to discuss and how to better. There's also this GGE, Global Government Experts about this of space, and this has also not been really, let's say, agreed. There's no clear decision made, but it doesn't mean that we're trying. We have been doing a lot. So we'll see, and hopefully there is an agreement soon, because we're stressing a lot through the common agenda of the Secretary General. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I have another one. I saw in your presentation that you talk about the permanent subcommissions, law commission and technical subcommission, right? But it was mentioned another one, I think, that is being created or something like that.
No, I think I only mentioned on a committee on the peaceful uses of outer space, where we have the two subcommittees, one scientific, one legal, and one main COPUOS meeting. So this is the 3 sets of meetings where we do it every year, February, April, and June. So this is the committee work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your questions.
Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Tenemos una más y en función del tiempo vamos a cortarlo en esta última pregunta. Muchas gracias.
Yukiko, thank you so much for your presentation. Luis Serrano, legal advisor, MFA of Chile. I would like to know, you already explained the agenda of the UN General Assembly of this concept. How the other developments in the regional efforts or scope have these, or how the SB, for example, approach to the UN or the other agencies is about development in this process? Or
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
you already explained the UN agenda on this matter, so I would like to know more about the other regional expert, for example.
I'm actually not the person in charge of leading the discussion of common agenda. It's actually another section leading it. So I'm happy to connect you to the person in charge so that he can clearly reply to you. But what I can say is that last week, my colleagues went to New York to discuss this matter. So I'm sure they have a little bit of update. And should you need more information, we also have this World Space Forum event coming up soon in December, where we will also focus on this common agenda and Summit of the Future. So maybe the registration is still open. So if you can register it, I think it also allows hybrid participation. So probably you might be able to listen to the discussion online. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Yukiko. Para la siguiente presentación, llamamos al escenario a Iristina Tolkova, de la Agencia Espacial Europea, quien trabaja actualmente en la agencia como responsable ejecutiva del Centro Europeo de Derecho Espacial y presta apoyo al Departamento de Servicios Jurídicos en asuntos de derecho espacial y derecho institucional. Antes de incorporarse a la ESA, trabajó en el Departamento de Derecho Internacional Europeo y comparado de la Universidad de Viena en las áreas del Derecho Internacional Público y Derecho Espacial, así como en el Ministerio de Educación y Ciencia de la República de Bulgaria, prestando apoyo en iniciativas culturales y educativas nacionales. Estudió Derecho y Ciencias Políticas en la Universidad de Viena.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Magdalena. And I'm sorry that I'm not as good as Yukiko in Spanish, so I'm not going to be able to give you any introduction more than buenos dias or buenas tardes. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm just going to ask the colleague to share the slides if possible. Now, I know that we're behind schedule and also that from what I understand, some of you might have already had technical advisory missions before here in Chile and maybe already know these fundamentals of space law. So for those of you that do not. We're going to get a very brief introduction over the course of the next 20 to 25 minutes, as the next 3 days you'll be delving back into these topics. So it's nothing that you need to remember straight away, because we'll go back to them in any case. So I'm just going to try to very quickly use an example that I liked hearing already in the morning from the other experts as well. I heard one of the colleagues, Isa, use it the other day, so it's not my example, but I still wanted to give it because I think it's quite relevant. Obviously, space activities are very important, not only for Chile, but worldwide, and we heard that already this morning. But why should it be important to also regulate space activities or set up national space policies? Now, I'm a lawyer, so I know why, but when I speak to my technical colleagues, they always see law sometimes as a bit of a tool that they have to use, but they don't like using, and they ask us why we make it so difficult for them to implement their missions, and I'll come to that a bit later on. But the example that I wanted to give basically is that using satellites and putting them into orbit and using them, of course, for very good measures here on Earth used to, up until a few years ago, be similar to, and this is the example again, it's not mine, if you would build yourself a car and you say, I have good use for that car, I can put it on the motorway, I can drive it, I can use it. So you take the car, you build it yourself, you don't have any rules how to do it, but you manage, and then you start driving it. Then the moment the car stops working, you just decide to abandon it on the highway and just get off the car and sort of go build yourself another car and then try to put it again on the highway and try to drive again, and then once it stops working, then you abandon it again, and so on and so forth. Now that actually would not work not only on Earth, but also it does not work in space. And just a little image, obviously, let's try to put it over there, that Yukiko also showed before. We have a limited number of space around Earth, even though we think that it's so vast, outer space, it is not, and that is why there needs to be very clear cooperation between states, and on some important matters there needs to be engagement between them to make sure that we all use space according to the fundamental principles of space law, to which we'll come in a second. And I don't need to tell you this in much detail because it was already repeated as well in the morning. The space sector is really an exponentially growing sector worldwide. There is a high increase of commercial activities as well as governmental activities, non-governmental activities, and there is a high number of launches and satellites launched into space. So there is a lot of traffic compared to what it used to be even only a couple of years ago. So in any case, that is even more crucial as a time right now to be thinking about how to use the orbital space and the environment. Now, outer space, even though some, pioneers, tech pioneers, I'm not going to name any names, may claim, it's the Wild West and we can do whatever we want. That's actually not the case. And I think you will hear more in detail about that in the next few days. But there are rules in outer space. So just because it's not on Earth does not mean that we can do whatever we want. And especially when it comes to the work of the United Nations, it needs to be highlighted that the United Nations has been instrumental in the last 60 years since the launch of Sputnik 1. Now, I'm not going to go into detail into these specific stages of space lawmaking that you see on the screen because we're a bit running behind schedule. But what I would try to delve into are the principles and the main things enshrined at the beginning. So you see dawn of space law and era of treaties is what we're going to try to cover in this presentation. And then obviously you will hear from the other experts as well on further principles, guidelines, as well as the role of non-legally binding instruments, also for national space legislation and national space policy, which I think will also delve quite nicely into the scenario-based exercise as well. So maybe very quickly, I know that it was mentioned before, but just to outline, and I hope the numbers are correct because I tried to take them from the UN website. But for those of you that are non-lawyers, you might have heard of it, but now you will have to remember it forever. It's something called the Outer Space Treaty, which is the Magna Carta of space law, as some like to call it. It is not a legal term, but it's still quite of relevance because you see how clearly it is the pioneer treaty in that regard. Not only did it start being negotiated through different mechanisms very, very shortly after the launch of the first space activity, as Yukiko mentioned, the UN was in that situation quite fast in making an ad hoc committee and starting to discuss basically what they need to discuss. You can see from the state parties that there is a lot, and not only are there a lot, but every major spacefaring nation currently, we could say that is a member of the, not only of the COPUOS, but most likely also that they have ratified the Outer Space Treaty. And Chile has also done so. So in any case, we don't need to delve into any specific, maybe academic questions about the notion of the principles. We'll hear in just a short moment. These principles are relevant for us today, not only in an academic context, but obviously in a very practical one. And then maybe just very briefly to outline treaties that you will hear about in the next few days, but not today, is the Rescue and Return Agreement, where it deals with how states treat astronauts, as well as space objects of other states. Obviously, it is, of course, a lot about cooperation as well, and the states considered, as you will see, that it's one of the most major issues they would like to find consensus on right after the main principles. So it came very shortly after the Outer Space Treaty. Afterwards, we also have the Liability Convention, which deals with matters of damage in outer space and how states can engage with each other on that to solve any issues related to it. There is also something called the Registration Convention, which is very relevant for the UN, especially as it sets up a mechanism as well and sets up incentive and initiative for states to establish not only national space legislation, but national registries and the ability to have an overview over their space objects and activities. There is also something called the Moon Agreement, which some of you may have heard of. We're not going to delve into it that much, I think, for this technical advisory mission, but of course the organizers know best. In any case, Chile is party to all of these treaties, so they're all relevant and should be taken into account, of course, but we're not going to delve into all of them as we don't have that much time. Generally, what needs to be said is that these treaties do not tell the member states how to set up a national space policy or how to set up a national space legislation. That is really up to the state itself to decide how it wants to proceed with that. And I think that the combination of understanding what exactly is needed or what is wanted by the states and also seeing the needs of country present, as is happening currently in Chile, is really the best combination to go forward, because obviously you need to identify what your country needs and how you can achieve it, how you can use space for the utmost benefit. And of course, you already heard a bit about how that is going to happen in Chile. But of course, when setting up that framework in place, there is some principles and some main norms that you have to kind of keep in mind. And in that regard, we're going to start very briefly and go through the main principles. And you will hear more about the details later as well. So Yukiko mentioned it before, there is a lot of members of the Committee of the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, but not all of them are spacefaring nations yet. Why is that the case, or why should it be important? Now, Article 1 of the Outer Space Treaty, so you could say the most important article because it comes first, but I'm not going to do that. In any case, the first article says that the exploration of outer space should be carried out for the benefit of all countries, irrespective of their degree of scientific and economic development. And that was obviously set up a long time ago, as you saw in 1967, but it was even less countries than today that had any spacefaring capability. But already then, the most important principle put forward is that we are doing this together in a cooperative mechanism. And that is also why the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space is really there to guide states through that. That is why it's one of the only committees that has consensus mechanism for decision making. Because some might criticize it, but in the end, because of the classification of outer space as a province of humankind, you might ask yourself, what does that really mean? It's not defined within the treaty, so it's of course up to the states to kind of look forward on that. But in the end, you see that that classification also was not easy to come to, and it is why some really justified consensus decision-making at COPUOS, because it's a matter for all, not just the ones that are currently doing it, or the ones that maybe be doing it in a few years. It's really about everyone. And it's about also the equal use, but we'll come to that a bit later. Also in Article 1, there is something to be kept in mind, is that the freedom of scientific investigation in outer space should also be something that should be equally accessible to all states.
So you can think about some other aspects that you heard this morning, where of course scientific investigation is the basis for a lot of other activities in space. And you can justify it one way and another, but that is one of the high-level principles put into the Outer Space Treaty. And you'll hear also from Rosanna a bit further on today how some of these principles will be more concretely implementable in national space law policy. And of course, if you have any questions, please, you're happy to ask them now or a bit at the end. Article 2 also is quite important because it sets something that is used a lot by states, and then people ask, what does it really mean? Outer space, as well as the moon and other celestial bodies, are not subject to national appropriation. And that is by claim of sovereignty, by means of occupation, or by any other means. Now, that does not mean that you cannot generally try to pilot the sovereignty of your country. You heard it this morning in the introduction, obviously, that you have plans by the government and other ideas that really try to establish the sovereignty of the state, such as access to space that is allowed. But here, what the drafters of the treaty really intended was that outside of the Earth environment, so outer space, moon, or other celestial bodies, should not be, in a sense, in any way for one state or another. That means that when the Americans put the flag on the moon, that does not mean it's American property. It also means that when there is certain states that might want to discuss and potentially allow their either governmental or non-governmental activities to relate to the utilization of resources in space. And you heard that that is one of the hot topics right now. This relates a little bit about this article. I can give you a bit the easy perspective because we have some colleagues that are really eager to do research on in situ resource utilization on the moon. So basically we have technical colleagues, scientists, that they really want to develop the technology to be able to sustainably use resources on the moon. And they want to put it forward so that in 10 or 15 years, if we go to the moon, we can use the resources there in a manner that is much easier than to bring everything from Earth. And they say, wouldn't that be nice? Because, we have to do it in 15 years. That means we have to now set up the first steps. And we kind of need to tell them, well, it's not our job to decide on that, because they ask us, of course, the legal department, so what do you say to our proposal? And we say, well, it's really not our place to decide, because the member states at the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space are currently having a working group and discussing this topic. They're about to decide the principles, how to move forward with resource utilization. So we cannot tell you how to do this project as of right now. And that is sometimes, I think, a bit also frustrating to the technical colleagues, and I understand that for a fact, but you see also how clearly it is needed to have some sort of framework or principles or any guidance for the states to be able to go forward. Because otherwise, for instance, in this specific situation, a technological development is a bit hindered by the fact that the states are currently in the process of discussing it. Just going to check the time. Another important principle in the Outer Space Treaty is that all activities in outer space are to be carried out in accordance with international law. This includes the UN Charter, but obviously it also includes other aspects, perhaps, as you might think of. I've just recently heard something about human rights in outer space or ethics, how to ethically use space. That is not in any way mentioned, of course, in the treaty. But still, what the treaty mentions is that outer space has to be used in the sense of maintaining also international peace and security. And of course, that generally is something that for lawyers might be a bit close to connect in any case, because of course, the Outer Space Treaty is part of international law. But it is also, when considering environmental aspects, such as space debris, interesting to see how other frameworks relating to, not similar, but relating to outer space might deal with certain matters, then try to also find connections to that. It's a bit of a maybe academic question for this exercise, but it's still, I think, important to note overall and maybe interesting in the future. There was a bit the discussion, but in different context, but I will still have to try to mention it. Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty, as you can see, really discusses the placement or non-placement of weapons, either of nuclear nature or weapons of mass destruction, into orbit or on the moon or other celestial bodies. Now, I don't think that this is in any case the subject of this technical advisory mission, so we will not delve into it in too much detail, but it is quite relevant to consider another aspect of this, which is that the moon and other celestial bodies, according to the drafters of the treaty, should be used for exclusively peaceful purposes. It even gives an example of what that could be, and it says no military bases, testing of weapons, or military maneuvers in space. Now, I think it's important to also note that peaceful purposes should not always mean non-military. That is not exactly what it says. It does say that what it says, obviously, but that does not mean that, for instance, military personnel, which sometimes, of course, have dual roles and are also able to act in different types of matters, it should not be, for instance, in any case involved in that regard. It's quite clear on, obviously, the weapons part, but in that regard, it does not exclusively prohibit any military activity, but you see that the peaceful purposes is something that will kind of enlarge the space activities, not only in this treaty, but in some of the other instruments that you will hear on as well. And just checking for the time. Now, this is something that I would think is the most essential for the exercise, so that's why maybe we should try to not go through it too fast. There is two concepts within the Outer Space Treaty which are really essential when it comes to space activities, and those are the concepts of responsibility and liability. And we're going to start with responsibility first, because that's how the treaty goes. So international responsibility, of course, in accordance with international law, is borne by state parties of the treaty for their governmental as well as their non-governmental activities. So that means that whether or an activity carried out, for instance, by Chile is carried out by the government, or it's carried out by, for instance, a company that would be set up in Chile, it would still be not the company, it would not be the person running the company, but it would still be the state party to the treaty that is internationally responsible for being able to carry out authorization of the activities of, let's say, that non-governmental entity, and also of continuing supervision. And this is something that I think, it's not that it's unclear to the states, because it's quite written in there, but it's a bit the length of which you have to go for to achieve this. Of course, if it's a governmental activity, it's quite easily taken under control, and you know the process, and you're able to know how the program is conducted, things like this. But what if you really try to foster your industry? Obviously, you try to grow the sector in your own country. So you don't want to perhaps only have students sending educational CubeSats into space, which is, of course, a nice thing, but you really want to foster that there is companies setting up in your state and want revenue, you want different parts of the sector to grow. How do you make sure that you grow the sector and at the same time you comply with this obligation, which means that you make sure that the way that they conduct activities is up to the best practicable standards, so they do not in any way related to the other principles, for instance, enshrine on somebody else? Or how do you make sure that they are complying with technical standards, or you think that they're making the best possible effort? We do give this example, but licensing a space activity or a space object is a very, very clear example of something that could happen. But it's not the only way for governments to supervise their space activity. So while a licensing process and setting up a national registry is in most cases how it's expected, the treaty itself does not state that. It does not state that you have to set up a licensing process, but obviously governments find it quite useful, and you will hear from government representatives which have done so in their own states and how they are implementing that. And I think also in relation to the scenario-based exercise, we have to go through that. That is a question that you might have to ask yourselves when trying to set up, maybe not the national space policy, but in any case, the national space legislation, is what is the best mechanism with the governmental structure already in place to make sure that you grow the industry and that you at the same time comply with that international obligation. And I have to say, I'm going to try to go into the liability without making it too confusing. But if we say that the one article deals with authorization and continuing supervision, and the responsibility of the state. The other article, which is Article 7, it comes right after that, deals with the fact that states are also liable for damage. And that is also why they need to authorize and continuously supervise. A state which, and we'll go through that in a second, in any ways launches, procures the launching of a space object, or from whose territory or facility the space object is launched, is internationally liable for damage to other state parties happened. And why is that such an important principle? The outer space activities, they remain very high risk and very hazardous. Even though if you try to, of course, conduct risk minimization and development of technology, in the end, you sometimes do not have control over what is happening. And this inherently risky activity is not only risky for your own objects, it's also risky to the objects of others. And that is why it's so important to try to find consensus, try to discuss with other states and find the best practices possible, is because you limit also your own risk of being liable. And when I say liable, it's not the same as running over somebody on the street and having an accident, because here I think the measures also of how high it could cost you are quite high. So it's not 100% the same. One of the treaties that I mentioned, the Liability Convention, really deals with this aspect of damage in addition to this principle in the Outer Space Treaty. It really clarifies difference of this liability, and the rules enshrined in there are quite detailed and quite useful for states. Of course, you can consider that not state that is ratified the Outer Space Treaty is also party to the Liability Convention, but when it comes to matters of liability, I would consider that that is really a good place to kind of think through and see how that principle has been really developed upon by the drafters. So at the time of the drafting of the Outer Space Treaty, not all concepts were there that are also then found in the Liability Convention. And in the end, of course, there has never been a case so far by states that one state has taken up a claim against another in that regard. It doesn't mean that there's been no collisions in space or no damage on Earth or in airspace, as you can see here, but it does mean that states are taking it seriously because this is such an important principle, because they do not want to be liable. They actually make sure that a lot of technical standards and guidelines, which are not found in this treaty, they're not found in any sort of UN documentation, but the states make sure to develop them, to exchange on them, and to provide them for their own country, because they can then say, we have done the best we could possibly do to make sure that we're not liable for damage. Could happen, but it's always just good to try to be as safe as possible in that regard. And if we try to kind of go through it a little bit like this, is of course, a state that conducts no space activity is neither responsible or liable. So if you don't want to do anything and sit back and relax, of course some states do that, but that's not what we're here today, and also that's not what we're trying to put forward, because obviously space has a lot of benefits. And to use those benefits, there is a mechanism in place, which does not mean that you have to sit back, do nothing, and also get nothing out of it. It means that the principles that are in place are actually not only useful to the states, but also there is sufficient practice that states developing capabilities right now can delve from, take upon, and then do it a bit better for, of course, their national mechanism. Generally, to come back to the fact, if you want to develop your industry, if you want to develop non-governmental entities, could be anyone, could be academia, could be operators, could be anyone from the private sector. If you want them to kind of set base in your country, you do definitely need to try to think about how to properly authorize them and how to continuously supervise. And there is no right or wrong answer, but that is also why the team from the UN has invited many different experts from national states to share their experience on that. The question of what state is a launching state will come up also in the scenario-based exercise, so that is why I'm just going to quickly try to once again reinstate it to make sure that at least the basics are here, and that of course we can discuss it in the course of the week. The Outer Space Treaty says, and I might be not so clear, but it's in there, a state that launches or procures the launching or from whose territory or facility an object is launched. Now, territory may seem quite fairly easy to pinpoint, as well as facility. But a state that launches or procures the launching is where it gets quite broad in the sense. It also means that there could be more than one launching state for a single space object. That means that, and you'll see it in your scenario-based exercise, that since space is a growing global economy, if you have satellite from your country put on a rocket of another country and shipped from the facility or territory of a third country, you have a multiple of states involved with this one single object. And the question then remains of how do in between them they apportionate any situation that might come after. And I'm not going to walk through the example because you have the scenario-based exercise for that, but I would actually be very happy to discuss that in this forum because it's something that whatever level we discuss this on, everyone always has questions about that. And I think that even in academia, it is not 100% always the same answer that you get, but that's why it's so important to discuss it. And something that I'm not going to go into it that much, but I will mention it so you realize that it's there and you'll see it for the exercise as well, is a state of registry. You heard before that there is a treaty, the Registration Convention, which also deals with matters of registration of the space object. A registration is not automatically connected to being a launching state, but the state of registry has to be at least one of the launching states, and it can be only one. So that is something interesting. I'm not going to, since this is not a presentation about registration, but it is interesting because it again goes to that step that states need to discuss amongst themselves. If a private operator, for instance, is launching rockets, let's say it might be the US. So the US currently has a very well-developed launch system, and there's launches going on almost every day. And there's a lot of payloads put on those launches. So how is it, for instance, the system that the US makes sure it is obviously a launching state, but it's a private company, it is launching from its territory. But how does it sort of make sure that it is the launching state for the objects, but not the state of registry? Because in the end, it has to be really made clear also legally from the moment that it's decided something would be launched up until the launch. After it, you can of course discuss, but the bargaining power is before. So I think that, not sure if we have any examples. I think we have from the US speakers, so it might be interesting to hear also, should they say anything about that? And how it is also in the states a bit bargaining power in the states capacity to decide how they want to approach that matter of the cooperative aspect. As you can see here, there is also the notion of registry in the Outer Space Treaty, but we're not going to delve into it too much because it's just, I think, important to remember it exists. It's relevant to the notion of launching state, and it will be discussed also in scenario-based exercise as well. And just quickly to close off, because you will be hearing about them as well, there is a variety of instruments that the committee is developing. It's constantly serving as a forum for the states to discuss on issues that are relevant for them, and you heard that before already. So that means that also in the course of time, it produces documents that it finds useful for the member states, because it's the member states sitting there and discussing them. And you see that things like space mitigation or long-term sustainability have been a matter of discussion at the committee for a very long time. And they have finally also been part of finalized documents that are then being put forward by the committee, and you can see them in the little booklet as far as I know. These instruments or these documents are not legally binding, so it's not as if what we say with the treaties is that we have an obligation and we have certain rules to follow. These are non-legally binding rules, but they serve as really not only the best practices put forward by states, but also they serve as a result of this consensus-based making mechanism. And that also proves that the states, at least in the final wording, found it important enough to decide on something to put forward, not only for themselves, but for future members and also for the whole community. And in that regard, I think COPUOS is very unique as a forum, because there is, of course, regional initiatives being discussed on all these matters as well. But to put them forward really and to bring them to the level of the UN also shows that everyone is interested in doing it so for the future of outer space, which, to come back to Article 1, is the province of all humankind. And we're all in some way or form, I wouldn't say responsible because that mixes up with the concepts, but we're all in some way or form involved in it. states, of course, more than everyone, because states are the members of the committee. And I do think that that is, no, this should not be in it. This should be the last slide. Let's see. So to leave it maybe a bit open, and to also go into the whole exercise and everything is going to be done. And I think you'll get the presentation as well at the end. The most important thing to remember is that states, and also Chile as a ratifying state of all the treaties, has certain obligations. That is just a fact. If you think if it's good or bad, it exists. The UN staff will say it's good that we have obligations. Why is that? We come back to the example of the car being left on the highway. But it is also an opportunity for you and for everyone to serve in that cooperation mechanism and to discuss and develop how best to use space. And lastly, there is responsibilities engaged in that, but there's also rights. As you can see, the freedom of scientific investigation, the freedom of use of outer space for all countries is something that is not that clear for other areas, I have to say. So in that sense, we have the baseline of a very productive discussion with not only the Outer Space Treaty, but the other principles as well. And I think that the next 3 days should be really very interesting in delving more into detail in all of these principles. I know that the time slot is very limited to go through all of these concepts, but I do hope that you're able to at least very quickly get the grasp of what exists and what you will hear again in the next 3 days. And I'm happy to take any questions, but if there's also more in-depth questions, you have to know that you will get more in-depth lectures as well added on. So for those of you that heard it for the first time, I hope it's not too much or too legal in any sense, but it is the baseline for this technical advisory mission. And I think that's it. So we're still very late, but thank you so much for listening. And if there's any questions, I'm very happy to take them as well.
Muchas gracias, Cristina, por tu presentación. Vamos a dar el espacio a 2 preguntas por una función del tiempo. Si hay alguien que quiera tomar.
Hello, my name is Rafael from the Foreign Ministry of Chile. Thank you for your presentation. Well, I have a little question about the case of, I have read about the idea of build a moon village. So that how that could be possible if we have for example, the Article 2 of the treaty, because that could be that could give the idea of being occupying the moon, and what will happen, for example, if if, for example, one state build the village or I don't know, house, for example, whatever, and another state wants to build or entry. So that could be how the I don't know if it's already managed or no, but
I think it's a very good question, and I think you did understand it correctly, because the concept could be seen as problematic exactly of why you mentioned it. So the member state or initiative of member states that might want to build that village come into close contact with Article 2, but that is also something that is currently being discussed at length. Resources utilization, exploration, and exploitation. And please correct me if I'm not using the terminology correctly, but indeed, because it is currently at the stage where states or some of the states would like to push for at least the utilization of these resources for scientific also development to see how to deal with them, there is currently diverging opinions on that. And that is why a working group was set up in the framework of the committee, and they're discussing within the next year exactly this question. So in that sense, I will not be able to answer it. I don't think that nobody could right now, because it's a very, very hot topic. There will be an International Space Resources Conference, I believe is the current name, and it's going to take place at the margins of the legal subcommittee. So also what Yukiko mentioned next year, and their states will also ask for expert opinions as well as provide the opportunity to discuss exactly that. So in this regard, while we do have Article 2, obviously it comes really also in contact with the opportunity that some states say, but we're not doing it also for research. We also want to learn how to use these resources. And that is something that I hope will be a bit more clear in the near future, especially because the people that are from the scientific side, they actually want clarity on the legal input because they want to know if they can try to develop the technologies to sustainably use the moon resources or not. And that is something that currently, and I can just tell you also what persons tell our ESA colleagues that maybe want to develop these types of things, and they say, but if we want to do it in 15 years, we have to do it now. We have to sort of agree now and set it forward, put up a research plan or something like this. And we, as the legal department, can only tell them we are not the ones to answer that question. It's currently being discussed by the states, and hopefully they will soon give us all an answer because it's a very interesting question. But yes, so I hope that it's not a satisfying answer, but it's the only one I could give. I could refer to the UNOOSA colleagues, but I'm not sure if they have something else to say. We're very happy as well to do so. Of course. Okay. Magdalena, if you allow, the question,
Yes, but before, antes de comenzar la siguiente pregunta, sí quisiera hacer un recordatorio a quienes nos están viendo online. Cualquier pregunta que tengan desde la plataforma de Zoom, pueden hacerlas llegar mediante correo a espacio@facs.mil.cl. Muchísimas gracias y dejamos la última pregunta.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. My name is Walter Fernandez. I work for the Space Operations Squad on the Chile Space Force, and I have a very short question. Have there been any sanctions or penalties placed to countries that don't comply with these regulations?
You mean with provisions of the Outer Space Treaty?
Yes.
So the Outer Space Treaty, obviously, as kind of a mechanism of international law, the way that a state party would be able to proceed against another state party is generally set up in the framework of every international treaty, but in any case, it would be something that could be put forward even to the International Court of Justice, because that is something that is open also to the state parties of the treaty. So if one state thinks that another state has violated an obligation, even these that are maybe more principle level, maybe not concretely clear, but if that one state thinks so, they could put that forward even as a claim to the International Court of Justice, but that has never been the case before. So that part of the mechanism has never been used. For issues of liability, which I quickly mentioned, the liability convention, it was close to getting that a bit, I think 10 or 15 years back. There was an issue where two member states of the treaty, so state parties basically, were coming in close contact to perhaps putting it forward, but they also managed to kind of settle it out of court. So they discussed it. It was, I think, the Cosmos Iridium, basically the Cosmos Iridium case where the state parties were Russia and Canada. Okay, so in any case, and there it was considered that it could be put forward as a claim of liability, but they were able to kind of discuss it out of court and not bring it forward. And I think that because of the extra care that is being taken by states to engage with each other and cooperate not only in the framework of COPUOS, but also of other things, I do hope that it might not even come to the point that you would have to bring forward something to the International Court of Justice, because obviously that is a very serious and very high level thing. And if you are able to engage with each other already on these principles, and you're able to make sure you share best practices, I do hope that we don't come further, although I think some international lawyers are actually waiting for that, because then a lot of academic issues and questions like customary international law and things like this could be clarified by the judges. So I think on the one hand, some people are really waiting for it, but others maybe feel that it might be also a bit too extreme, but it's never been the case. So.
Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, y con esto hemos terminado la sección de la mañana. Antes de liberarlos al horario de almuerzo, desde la organización quieren proyectar los lugares escogidos donde ustedes pueden almorzar, y la hora de retorno la hemos modificado a las 2:15, a las 14:15 horas vamos a partir con el segmento de la tarde. Muchísimas gracias a todos por la participación de la mañana, y dentro de los lugares que podemos encontrar para el almuerzo están Si me ayudan con la siguiente diapositiva. El Club Providencia, en Avenida Okumura 2878. Dolce y Salado, en Heliodoro Yáñez 2820. Y el Oxxo en también Heliodoro Yáñez 2882. Muchísimas gracias a todos y nos vemos a las 2:15 de la tarde. Muchas gracias.
Next, flexibility is important. Yes?